So sometimes it is tough being an MMO fan. You guys know what I'm talking about. The sheer amount of disappointment that we have to sit through every single year is more than in almost any other gaming genre. And while 2021 definitely has some good looking MMOs coming, I know, like me, you guys are looking for an active, popular MMORPG to spend some time in while you wait to try out all the shiny new games. We're pretty much wired to be attracted to games with high populations because not only does it mean that a large percentage of players find the game worth their time, but it's also a guarantee that it isn't going to shut down anytime in the immediate future. And with all of the recent MMO closures, I feel like we kind of need that safety net. And that is what we're here today to talk about. The 10 most populated MMORPGs. 10 MMOs that you could jump into right now, spend hours every single day, probably for the next few months if you want to, and enjoy hopefully a new experience. Now, every game won't appeal to every person, and I'm sure a lot of you guys have played several of these at least partially, but I guarantee you, one of these games will satiate that thirst you have either for PvP, endgame rating, combat, or graphics. Although before we do go ahead and jump into this list, I would like to note that we stream every MMO in this list over on our Twitch channel at twitch.tv/MMOByte. We stream every week, Tuesday, Saturday, and Sunday at 3 p.m. EST. I urge you guys to come on over and join in on the fun if you're interested in how any of these games are currently holding up in 2020 going into 2021. Now let's go ahead and do this. I'm listing the games starting from the 10th most popular through to the most popular, and starting this list off with Blade and Soul. Ever since Blade and Soul was released, the game has remained a staple of what action MMOs would need to aspire to if they wanted to enthrall players with their combat system, having what is generally considered by many a fan to have one of, if not the best, action combat in an MMORPG. While the game is down to a mere couple servers, it's worth noting that the population is still fairly healthy. It doesn't have nearly as many new players joining in as it once did, but the game averages anywhere between 40 to 60,000 players active over the course of the entire month. Granted, many of those players aren't necessarily logged in concurrently, with only a few thousand players being logged in at any given time, but there is a solid number of players logging in regularly enough to promote competition and provide a sense of life. Various statistic websites claim upwards of 100,000 active players, with websites that track Asian countries claiming several 100,000 players, but considering this list is aimed exclusively at Western audiences, since that's where the majority of our community plays, those aren't going to be included. I've played through Blade and Soul quite extensively. I have a Hongmoon 22 Zen Archer and have been at endgame on several different characters over the years. While the game has changed drastically since when I first started playing, and the MMO is a very different title now, players still find it highly enjoyable. To date, it is still a beautiful looking game with fantastic character creation, customization, and the action combat is a lot of fun to play with. EVE Online was popular back when it was a premium game, but since converting to a free-to-play model, the game has found increased success. Maybe not necessarily with the original community of players, but considering an announcement was made earlier this year claiming over 300,000 monthly players, I would argue it is definitely a success. This is a game that took the MMO formula and completely threw it out the window. This is nothing like any other MMO you have ever played, and I will be the first to admit its difficulty. I played the game a few years ago to test it out, and after spending a few hours in game, I was still so confused that I ended up dropping it. Obviously, not every game is going to appeal to every type of player, and with the little time I have to invest into games that require too much research, it just doesn't really warrant the time invested for me. This is a very unique game though, that is unlike anything you have tried out before, at least anything in the MMO scene that you've ever tried out, and with the new EVE mobile game that was just announced, you can bet that there will be even more attention in the coming months. Star Wars: The Old Republic is a bit of an interesting game. It has never truly been as large as some of the other games here, averaging 130,000 or so active players each month, but that has definitely taken a drastic turn as of the last few months, with the game launching onto Steam and having new life breathed back into it. Since launching onto Steam, we've seen the player population more than double, raising to anywhere between 275,000 to 320,000 monthly players. With tens of thousands of players actively playing concurrently via Steam and tens of thousands of players playing via the official launcher, the game has never felt more alive. While The Old Republic definitely looks and feels a little more dated than some of the titles in this list, it's worth noting that a great looking game doesn't mean a game will actually be great. Take a look at Anthem or Crucible as an example. Star Wars: The Old Republic utilizes a pretty traditional tap target combat system and provides players with large worlds to explore, but the real bulk of the game comes in its story, which is woven so beautifully into the world, providing infinite choices and branches for players to explore. I've never truly gotten far enough into this game, but it remains one of Mrs. Styx's favorites to date. Love or hate Black Desert Online, you cannot argue the impact it has had on the genre over the last couple years, nor the popularity it has amassed as one of, if not the most quote-unquote beautiful MMORPG, and having the quote-unquote best combat in an MMORPG. Now, while the aesthetics of a game and the combat styles are completely subjective, there's no denying how many people actively play the game. I went around Googling and saw that there were a few different websites claiming that there were over 2 million active players playing BDO each month, and I can say with certainty that this is a gross overestimation. While the game is definitely very highly populated at over 400,000 monthly active players, it's far from closing in on World of Warcraft. I found myself coming back to play Black Desert on occasion purely because at its core it's a very fun game, but the lack of direction and endgame PvE outside of grinding always left me wanting more out of it than I ultimately ended up getting. Guild Wars 2 is definitely a little more difficult to get an accurate gauge of. This used to be one of the kings of the MMO genre, averaging as many active players as the Elder Scrolls Online or even Final Fantasy XIV. And don't take this as me claiming it is in any way in bad shape, but the game has definitely declined quite a bit from the titan it once was, averaging approximately 450,000 to 500,000 active players each month. I have always been a fan of Guild Wars 2. I streamed it back years ago when I first started the channel, and this was one of the games that I regularly covered. It was an MMO that started off as a buy-to-play title, then changed business models to free-to-play with paid expansions, opening the game to so many new people that likely still actively play to this day, and with the new expansion announcement, players are coming back to reacquaint themselves with the game. This is a game that actively pushes players to play together at all levels of play, syncing one another to zone-appropriate brackets to prevent power creeping, something that I had always found kinda interesting. And on to that, it's a great quality hybrid action combat style, it's a large segregated world, and a ton of different content to consume. This has always and likely will always be one of my top 5 favorite MMOs. Honestly, I had never really gotten into the Elder Scrolls Online until recently, when we began streaming the game over on Twitch, and it is a lot more enjoyable than I actually remember it being. I have always been a fan of the Elder Scrolls games. I wasted over 1,000 hours in Morrowind back on Xbox in the day, and another 1,000 or 2 on PC with mods years later. And after playing through some of the Greymore DLC, I can see why players are still so fond of the title. ESO has always been highly populated. It is one of the kings of the genre after all. However, it has definitely declined a little over the last couple years. While it used to be in direct competition with Guild Wars 2 and Final Fantasy XIV, it now sees itself falling behind, averaging approximately 500,000 to 600,000 active players per month, which is very evident if you play the game. The sheer number of players actively outplaying in the world is more than I see in most other games. One thing that always bothered me about the game though is its combat system, and that's something that I've noticed is becoming more apparent the more I play through it. But then I know that's a common complaint among the community. This is an MMO that I cannot wait to play through more, as it is one of the few games that I truly think is captivating enough with its world and its story to keep me playing long term. Okay, don't hate me for saying this, but I have never really been too big a fan of RuneScape. Not because I think it's a bad game by any means, neither RuneScape 3 nor old school RuneScape, but because I've always just been a huge fan of other games and couldn't dedicate nearly enough time to it. Nevertheless, it has remained one of the most populated MMOs on the market for as long as I can recall, averaging 150,000 players online concurrently and over 600,000 monthly active players. It was the number 3 most populated MMO until recently, and will likely retake that spot by the end of this year, maybe the beginning of next year. While RuneScape is definitely a very dated looking MMO, it provides so many different things to do that players never get bored, and the sheer number of updates it receives every year is astonishing. Its tab target combat is a little slow, but it more than makes up for it with the world and freedom, more than almost any other MMO out there. If only I could find the time to actually invest into it though. Phantasy Star Online 2 has knocked RuneScape out of the top spot recently with their launch onto Xbox One, the PC via the Microsoft Store, and then onto Steam as well, bringing total monthly players up to anywhere between 700 to 800,000 active players. While this will no doubt decline quite significantly over the next 6 months, it's definitely shown how popular the PSO2 IP is, crossing 2 million total registered players earlier this month, and honestly, it is one of the reasons that we're receiving a brand new PSO2 game next year, New Genesis. If the game had rolled out onto PS4 as well, we'd likely see the game be a direct competitor to Final Fantasy XIV, but alas, PS4 fans will have to continue to wait. I've invested hundreds of hours in a PSO2 over the years, both the Japanese version and the North American version, or, well, now the global version of the game. I'm looking forward to New Genesis as it's set to completely overhaul the action combat system, the graphical system, and bring PSO2 into the next generation of MMO gaming, and it looks phenomenal. Final Fantasy XIV is one of my 2 favorite MMOs of all time and coincidentally happens to be one of the 2 largest MMOs of all time, only increasing in population with each expansion. As an example, Heavensward pre-orders were at 780,000, Stormblood pre-orders were at 880,000, while Shadowbringers pre-orders hit almost 1.5 million. The total number of registered players was at 18 million as of December 2019, while a few months ago they'd actually announced the game had crossed 20 million unique players. Although do note that this isn't the confirmed number of active players, even despite some of you believing so. You will not believe how many players come into the comment section stating Final Fantasy XIV has 14 million, 18 million, 20 million players. It is the most popular MMO ever. Like, dude, believe me, this is one of my favorite games, man. I love it, but I'm not a fool that believes it's more populated than WoW. Earlier this year, it was reported that Shadowbringers actually had well over 1.2 million active players playing, an all-time high for the game. And while numbers have definitely declined a little since then, with the recent patch that just dropped and the end of the Shadowbringers expansion content, it's a safe bet to conclude at least 800,000 to 1 million active players playing monthly. And with the next expansion coming out in the middle of next year, you know for a fact it's going to spike even more the closer we get to the release and the announcement. I know some people claim the tab target's bad, but I'm perfectly fine with it, and I love the graphical style, the large open world, and one of the best stories in an MMO. World of Warcraft is a little more complex since I'm putting both WoW and WoW Classic together. One subscription counts for both games, so it seems obvious to, right? WoW has been the king of the genre for many years. There's no denying that. And if you'd asked me earlier this year what I thought the population was, I probably would have said that it was at the lowest point it has been at ever since its inception. However, with the announcement of Shadowlands earlier this year and closing in on its release in the next few months and its pre-patch overhauling the entire leveling experience, that is no longer a reality. In fact, if we combine the active player numbers for WoW, which are at anywhere between 2 to 3 million right now, with the 600,000 to 800,000 active players for WoW Classic, we get anywhere between 2.5 to 3.5 million active players playing World of Warcraft, at least in some form as of this moment. Yeah, even Warlords of Draenor at its lowest point had 4 million active players and Legion had significantly more than this, but I guarantee you that they're trying their utmost to turn this around. To me, WoW still has the best tab target combat in an MMO, and one of the most lore-rich worlds filled with an almost unparalleled number of things to do. And while Battle for Azeroth may not have been a great expansion, the number of pre-orders for Shadowlands is through the roof, and we'll see WoW at over 10 million active players again soon, however long that lasts. Now, regardless of your thoughts and your opinions on any of the individual MMOs, there's no denying the fact that the genre is still plenty alive, having millions, tens of millions of players spread across a variety of different MMOs. Yes, the genre has definitely stagnated over time, that is very evident, but it in no way means that it will remain in such a state. We've got plenty to look forward to in 2021 and have a lot of great games to still occupy ourselves with right now. Hopefully you can find solace in one of these games knowing that there are hundreds of thousands of other players readily available to journey with, to grind with, to raid with, to engage in PvP. You'll find Mrs. Sticks and I in multiple of these, actually streaming over on Twitch if you want to come on over at twitch.tv/MMOByte and join us. But this is my opinion, my impressions of the genre right now. What are you guys currently playing though? Let me know down in the comments below and let's talk about it. Anyway guys, that is it for me. Thanks for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to subscribe for more content like this and I'll see you all next time.
Someday soon I'm gonna make it. Yeah, all hard work's gonna be worth it. Ooh,